Hey everyone, this is Chrono. In Diablo 4, the patch just landed today. It's patch 1.1.1, and one of the changes I was most interested in trying out was how Temerity feels in high nightmare dungeon keys. So I logged on today, and the very first thing I did was run about 4 or 5 keys with various setups, most of them including Temerity with or without healing, and I wanted to go over what my findings are. Now, that's not a lot of testing. It's only 4 or 5 keys on tier 100 on a rogue specifically. So you should do your own testing to see whether your findings line up with what I was able to discover. And maybe it's not particularly good for me, but great for you if you play another class, or you might have a setup that has a little bit more damage reduction or a different mix between damage reduction and healing. So I encourage you guys to do your own testing. But I wanted to make this video to give you guys a baseline for those of you who haven't tried it out yet. In my normal setup, I don't use Temerity. These are the pants I normally run with. It has a lot of damage reduction, so I'm a little worried that once I take these off, things that normally would take a huge amount of my health will start to one-shot me. And that'll be based on whether or not the uptime of the shield is actually reliable, based on how much healing I'm bringing in and how often I have to use a potion. But yeah, I normally wear these pants with cheats. I run a greedy setup that has shared misery rather than another healing or damage reduction aspect on my chest. Might on helmet, and disobedience on neck. I've gotten pretty comfortable with this setup, with the exception of going against ghost archers and banshees. I think every other mob type in dungeons, this provides enough damage reduction for me to be able to respond to most damage profiles. The only sources of healing that I lean on are just having good enough awareness to be able to use potions and Siphon Strikes. I do not use Stolen Vigor. But later in the testing, I will swap to Stolen Vigor to combine with Temerity and see how that feels. But normally, I don't have very much healing. So we're going to start in a tier 100 Dom Hind Tunnels using my normal setup. I'm using Shared Misery and my normal pants with cheats, so no Temerity and no Stolen Vigor. So under normal conditions, the things that hit me the hardest are the ranged enemies. So these quill rats, as long as they're not hitting me so hard such that I don't have time to react, then we're in a good place. As long as I can get into combat, deal damage without panicking for my life, every second, then we're in a good spot. And it was around this point I realized that the density buffs are real. So I should have just disengaged right here, but I realized this combat is lasting a lot longer than it's normal. So the density buffs are definitely a real thing, at least for this particular dungeon. I did 2 Older's dungeons, and I can't say for certain that the plus 30 to 40% density buff there applied, because Older's was already a dungeon that had a lot of mobs. But I definitely noticed it here. There were a lot more cool rats than I'm used to seeing in one spot. After I clear out this area, this is where I swapped off of my normal pants onto Temerity. So I spend the rest of this dungeon with Shared Misery and Temerity. So I still have very little healing. I'm relying solely on my ability to stay aware and use potions and Siphon Strikes. In this setup, I have about 11,000 life, and the Temerity barrier caps at around just shy of 8k. With Temerity equipped, you do want to go into combat by pre-potioning if you don't have the barrier active, because it does expire after about 8 seconds, and that was something I tended to forget during this first run. But whenever the barrier wasn't down, anytime my health actually moved, I would lose huge chunks of it. That combination of maybe 2-3 auto attacks took about 75% of my total health bar in within half a second. So this is where I realized if I'm going to be wearing Temerity, the uptime of the barrier is of utmost importance. The moment the barrier drops, my health starts spiking, and I immediately have to retreat. Now right here is where I realized just how squishy I was. I'm about to engage on non-elite packs with no Temerity barrier active. I have no disobedience stacks. I engage with Might active, and I just get almost one-shot by that Mauler's auto attack. I took one light hit that reduced me down to about 85% health, and the Mauler's auto attack just straight up one-shot me. Using my normal setup, even if I don't have full stacks of disobedience and might active, regular auto attacks won't just straight up kill me like that. So that just emphasized just how important having the barrier active is if you're going to be using Temerity. The moment you notice that your health isn't protected by that light blue circle, indicating that you have a barrier, that's when you should immediately pop a potion while wearing Temerity, or consider backing out, disengaging until the barrier is a little bit healthier. Because as you've seen, even white attacks can be a huge lethal threat to you if you don't have any barrier active. So now we're going to head over to a tier 100 Deadman's, and I swapped out my chest, so I'm not going to be using Shared Misery for this run. I instead am going to be using Stolen Vigor, so I'll be passively healing about 1,000 health every second so long as I have 3 stacks of momentum. And I'm still wearing Temerity, so my barrier is like constantly refreshing a little bit so long as I'm healing faster than the damage I'm taking in. And of course I run into the Butcher like at the very beginning. So what better test to see if you're tanky enough than to face off against the Butcher. And I realized very early on that even if I had used my 9 potions efficiently, there's no way I was beating this guy. So confirmed, Temerity plus Stolen Vigor not good enough to withstand the damage of a tier 100 Butcher. One of my biggest gripes with Temerity is that there's no way to tell what percentage of the barrier you currently have from the UI. If you have a barrier present, then it just shows the blue aura around your health bar, but that doesn't tell me like how big of a barrier it is and whether or not I should be using a potion at the moment. With Stolen Vigor, it definitely felt a lot better than the previous run. But right here, as you can see in this pack, like burst damage almost feels like it's impossible to react to. And in that situation, my normal setup, I definitely could have been able to kill at least 1 or 2 of those elites and have enough reaction time to either use a potion to continue the engagement or run away. But I just straight up died right there. Like as soon as I got my damage in, I just fell over. With Temerity equipped, I feel like if mobs last long enough to do even just a little bit of damage, like right here, like I just get blasted by the lightning damage that I normally would be able to tank through a little bit with my normal setup. Like normally I'd be able to like sit in there for 2 to 3 seconds, feel it out, and make an informed decision about whether or not I can continue the engagement, or like use the potion and heal back and re-engage. With Temerity, like if I stay long enough to even see the lightning damage go through, then there's a good chance I just fall over. Now the intermission for this particular run is the horde that the game sends at you, where you face off against a whole bunch of enemies at once, to the point where near the hardest point you'll be facing off against like 4, 5, maybe even 6 elites all at once. And I've cleared this successfully without dying many times in the past on Deadman's on my normal setup. So I was a little surprised that like before the fight even got difficult, I just straight up died there within like a 1 second window. And I was actively trying to use potions to maintain the barrier. So it was at this point that I realized that like, at least for the way I play and for Rogue specifically, I'm not convinced that the changes to Temerity are particularly amazing. I think maybe if you play a class that has a lot more health, like I know I've seen Barbs have like 18 to 20k plus health in their current setups. Maybe Temerity might work better for you, especially since you play a class that has 45 mechanics. But for a class that's as squishy as Rogue, taking off your pants, which has so many possible defensive options, to gain a barrier, I don't think it's quite worth it. At least for high nightmare dungeons. I think it's probably great for speed farming, but for doing T100 specifically, or just higher nightmare dungeons in general, I think you're better off using regular pants that have up to 4 defensive stats on it and another defensive aspect over the barrier. Like I said earlier, this is from a very short testing session. Like I probably spent like no more than an hour-ish gathering this information, and I've only done it on Rogue and for one specific setup. You may find that your setup is improved by the Temerity changes. So I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are. For those of you who have tried Temerity today, especially those who play a non-rogue class, did you find that the Temerity changes were an improvement to your build, or do you think that unique item still needs a lot of help? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.